Do I have any advice to help you with this? No, I mean, I'm not, like, you know, start trusting people. Try playing somebody other than you. Try playing somebody who is trustworthy. Yeah, I mean, it comes down to, there's a lot of psychology in what you just asked, and I'm afraid to get into it. Would I be offended by somebody composing a video essay response to my rules as language video? I don't care. I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't be sad. There are lots of videos out there. I'm not the only YouTuber.
Well, I still think it was polite to ask, so that's fine. Hello there. My name is JoJo. I am a dungeon master, if you couldn't tell by my general demeanor, and I enjoy talking about things in a comedic way. So I know you saw the title of this video, and I want you to know that that's not what this video is about. This is a response to language, not rules, but it's not really about that. It's really about the response itself. This is a video about itself. Right before I sat down to do this recording, I had kind of a thought as to why I was even bothering, which is a weird question to ask yourself right before you do something, especially when you've prepared for it for a really long time. Like, I really couldn't explain why I was making the video, and especially why I was making it the way that I was making it. I mean, like, why did I feel compelled to break down everything that Matt said about his personal experience playing a game? Like, I'm the cinema sins of Dungeons and Dragons advice.
Oh, what? You call that a shirt? I can't believe that dungeon masters wear glasses now. Man, I wish this format was better.
Because that's exactly what this video was going to be. That kind of a video, where all I was going to do was just break down all of Matt's claims and, like, listen to the word I'm using to describe the things that he said in that video. Claims. Like it's an argument. I mean, it is argumentative in the sense that it is convincing, but it is not a formally written argument. It's a very personal, like, conversational explanation of his approach to playing a game. So the kind of critical scrutiny I was intending to apply was at best inappropriate and at worst very, very petty. So I stopped. I stopped making that video entirely and just kind of just felt really, really bad. Like I felt really scared and like a little sick to my stomach. And I couldn't even bring myself to watch Language Not Rules again, to figure out maybe if I had come up with a bad take or maybe my argument wasn't good or something like that. I couldn't bring myself to watch it. I just felt awful, and I didn't know why. And then I saw this video pop up in my feed. I like Contrapoints, so I gave it a watch.
I'm suspicious of envy as a motivation for politics. Because remember, the basic logic of envy is, if I can't have it, then no one can, which is a purely negative, destructive style of thinking. It's taking privileges away, not for the material benefit of the underprivileged, but merely for the psychological satisfaction of the envious person. Satisfaction of the envious person. Satisfaction of the envious person.
Yeah. I got a touch of the envies, and that's what we're going to talk about. I am going to say some stuff about D&D and language and all that stuff, but trust me, that's not the bulk. Most of this is going to be talking about psychology and effective neuroscience, not at a complicated level, just at the level that I needed to look it up in order to be able to understand what was going on with me. If you're not into that, feel free to bail out. I don't feel bad. But if you are into that, hey, and go ahead and hit the likes and the subscribes and all that stuff that people do. Because I am a YouTuber. I really would like Raid Shadow Legends to pay me money to tell you about Raid Shadow Legends. So let's start with the only thing that I was actually able to say from the original script, and I had to grab my laptop because what I wrote was really complicated. In Language Not Rules, Matt Colville makes the argument that the rules of a role-playing game are much closer to a language than they are to the rules of, say, spelling or grammar. Mostly because rules in a role-playing game are not meant to be followed prescriptively. They are meant to supplement the actual ambiguity that's present within a role-playing game.
The rules of the game, whatever RPG you're playing, this isn't unique to D&D, give us a language with which to communicate. And it is that communication that's important.
No matter how good your dungeon master is or how well you say how you wanted to do that, the side fact is you're never going to be physically present within the experience that's happening within the game. This is not even to mention the fact that the rules of physics and causality are pretty loose within that construction itself. So it's pretty ambiguous how anything is meant to work or even be.
The designers want to make sure there is a system and it is consistent, but they don't want to create a rule for every possible situation. The DM can just sort of guess. If there were a rule for this unique situation, what would it be?
Rules, even when they are applied like a language, are a way of limiting the infinitely playful signification that can take place within a construction of pure language. You have no idea how much studying I had to do over the past 2 weeks to be able to say that last thing I just said. The rules provide a structure, a center by which people who are playing are able to say what happens, and the others are willing to agree. Because the rules are essentially a tacit agreement that we understand certain aspects about this world in the same way, even though ultimately we can do whatever we want.
Don't waste time looking it up, just guess. And if you're familiar with the rules, your guess might not be correct, but it will be good. Your players will think, that's fair, and you can move on. The ability to make a fair ruling on the fly that everyone at the table thinks is good is incredibly powerful because it keeps the game flowing.
No, but because rules have sort of a structure, they would have to have a binary non-existence, which in this case would be non-rules or imaginative free-flowing discussion. Derrida once famously said, "Turn down for what?" When Matt describes his transition from following the rules strictly within 3.5 and then moving towards a more free-flowing, less prescriptive application of rules, specifically for the purposes of creating drama, and also because that just fit his sensibilities more. He just liked doing that more. What Matt didn't actually invalidate the rules themselves. It actually enhances what the rules are supposed to be or can be.
The rules are not a tyrant to be obeyed. They are a tool to help you. They work for you, not the other way around. And what are the rules for? They exist for exactly the same reason as the rules of syntax and grammar, which every writer I know ignores whenever they feel like it, and that is they exist to help you communicate, to express yourself. They allow you to be creative. They are building blocks you can ignore or take apart and put together however you see fit.
And this is made doubly true when you consider the fact that the rules of a role-playing game are meant to be leveraged in a purely non-competitive way. You're not trying to win D&D, nor are you trying to lose. It is experiential. By having a rule set that allows you to clear up ambiguity, you can enhance the experience. So, hot take, I agree with Matt's perspective. I think it's 100% right.
Guess that I'm better without you, so fuck you forever and thank you for wasting my time.
I'm left with a very odd conundrum. I wrote this script for about 2 weeks. It ended up being roughly 30,000 words across all of the drafts, and the draft that I was going to work with was about 20 single-spaced pages. When I say that this was the only thing that I could salvage, I really mean it. The original video was going to take like 2 hours to get through. It was going to be a very long and absurd affair. And ultimately, it was going to be 2 hours of me just agreeing really hard. Why did I do that? Envy. I was experiencing envy. I was envious of Matt Colville from my perspective because he had made a video about how the rules of D&D and the rules of language had a common parallel. And he was getting a lot of comments and likes and views for it. So I was envious. But that still didn't quite explain what was going on with me. Because, well, I felt like I was experiencing envy wrong. I cleaned my glasses and grabbed a Stridex pad between takes. If I was looking a little gross in the first couple takes, and I look less gross now, that's probably why. Envy, as it was conceptualized in the video by Contrapoints, is as follows.
Pain at the good fortune of others is not a bad start, but there's more to it than that. Envy is a syndrome, a complex of poisonous thoughts and feelings about people who have what we want but cannot get. It's not just wanting what someone has, it's begrudging them what they have. You might even hate the person you envy and want them to lose what they have, to be humiliated and destroyed, even if their downfall doesn't benefit you in any way.
Now, I really don't have anything else to add to the discussion of envy from a metaphysical or a philosophical or even a historical perspective. Natalie's video is amazing, and you should all watch it. And I watched it, and that's the only reason I'm even able to talk about this at all. But this kind of left me in sort of a weird place because, well, I know what envy felt like. It was a toxic, sick feeling that I had as a result of someone else's success. It was a negative and sort of destructive desire. But I also know what it compelled me to do, which was arguably very, very positive, which is strange when you think about it, because envy is bad. But it was definitely envy that compelled me to do this. I was envious. That's why I set about to doing anything in regards to his video. And when I say I did positive things as a result of my envy, I mean that. Like, I did research for 2 weeks straight. I read really complicated books. I watched videos and channels on philosophy and theory that I never would have watched otherwise. I got a library card. Also, by the end of that 2 weeks, I was actually feeling more compassionate towards people who would get upset at each other at the way that they run Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, like, there were a lot of positive benefits that came from me having envy. My envy was very benign. But the common idea of envy is that it is malicious. When you are envious, you lash out. You are trying to revel in the misery of the person that you envy. So why did I have benign envy when most people had malicious envy? But as I started looking into it, what I sort of realized is I did have malicious envy and I had benign envy, because you can have both of them. And, well, the science is actually starting to see that. My roommate is, I think, cleaning, so they're moving stuff. The conceptualization of envy as having different forms that can be experienced simultaneously, as well as different consequences because of those forms, is known as the dual approach. In the article Envy and Adversarial Review, they define envy as follows.
Envy involves burdensome pain about being inferior to another person. It occurs as benign envy, entailing a longing to improve oneself and emulate the envied person, and malicious envy, entailing hostile thoughts and intentions directed at harming the other.
In other words, envy is a form of psychic pain that compels you to take action in order to alleviate that pain. Malicious envy leading you to lash out and attack, as well as benign envy, attempting to better yourself to be more like the person you envy. It's hard to know what the tipping point is between having benign envy and malicious envy. And also, because of the way that envy functions in the dual approach, it's really, will it be more benign or more malicious? Because there are so many potential factors related to your identity, it's really, really hard to pin down. Things like life experience, your specific neuroarchitecture, stress, attitude, cultural conditioning, your social group, what you ate that day. There are a ton of things that can affect how your envy feels to you and also the consequences of that envy. In the review, they determined that there are at least 2 key factors that seem sort of integral to determining whether or not your envy is more malicious or more benign. And those 2 factors are how genuinely you believe that the person whom you envy deserves their advantage, and how much control you feel you have over whether or not you could get the same advantage. With the idea being that if you see someone whom you envy and you really think they deserve it, as well as the fact that you could also get it yourself, your envy is very likely going to be very benign.
I have to say, you guys seem very happy together.
Well, we have our moments.
I'm excited because we're going antiquing this weekend.
I love antiquing. Everything is so old.
I like it too.
You said you hated it.
I hated finding these treasures and not being able to fit them in the car. Now I got a CRV.
CRV?
Yeah, Rick's new Honda. He won't shut up about it.
It's kind of a game changer.
Certainly a sex life changer.
Sorry, we're being obnoxious. So what have you been up to?
I don't remember. CRV, you say?
CRV?
CRV.
Now, the flip side of this would be if the person whom you envy, from your perspective, does not deserve the advantage they have. And this is made even worse if you do not know how they were able to claim that advantage, meaning that you really have no control over whether or not you could get it yourself. The more you think it's undeserved, or if you feel very little to no control over whether or not you could get it yourself, the more likely your envy will be malicious.
There you go. Bye.
I don't want to rub salt in the wound here, David, but Jocelyn is kind of crushing it.
Okay, I have also had a very active day on the sales floor.
David, she has sold more in one day than we have all week, and you've spent the better part of the afternoon standing in the corner giving her cut eye.
I'm mentoring her and monitoring her progress, and frankly, it's not moving as fast as I'd like.
Why can't you just admit that she is an asset?
It's probably beginner's luck, like when you walk into a casino and win big on your first pull of the Basic Instinct slot machine.
Okay, I'm beginning to think that that is the high point of your entire life.
All I'm saying is I don't necessarily trust the numbers.
Oh.
Now, the term advantage that I'm using in this context, I'm taking from Antonio Damasio from his book Descartes' Error, which is a book about the role of emotions as relates to reasoning and decision making.
Whenever I call a decision advantageous, I refer to basic personal and social outcomes, such as survival of the individual and its kin, the securing of shelter, the maintenance of its physical and mental health, employment and financial solvency, and good standing in the social group.
Again, the idea of what an advantage is based on perception. It seems like an advantage, which kind of lines up perfectly with descriptions of envy from a metaphysical or philosophical perspective. It's the idea that you see something who is better off than you, and so you have an emotional reaction. They have a survival advantage that you lack.
Likewise, it didn't matter to Weimar anti-Semites that Jewish people were a marginalized minority. Anti-Semitism is often rooted in an envious obsession with the disproportionate influence and affluence of Jewish people.
It is not the absolute differences between men which feed envy, but subjective perception, the optics of envy.
So, with that information in mind, we were able to do a little bit of a case study on my envy towards Matt Colville, and it actually is pretty easy. Matt and I are both
a white, middle-class, middle-aged nerd, and if you guessed, I bet that guy plays D&D, you would be correct.
It's not just those aspects of identity that make my comparison fairly simple. We both have roughly equivalent interests, I would argue. We both know how to make videos. You can make the argument that he knows how to make better videos than I do, but there's no accounting for taste, and I think this is fine. And we both have enough knowledge about role-playing games so we can speak to them with a level of sophistication and eloquence. I also have $150,000 in student loan debt, which is neither here nor there, because it's debt. It is literally defined by being neither here nor there. So it's actually pretty easy for me to view the advantage that Matt has as something that he deserves. By advantage, of course, I mean he has a video that he made about the way that rules work, and people are liking it and agreeing with it. He's leveraging the skills that we both share to make this cool thing. However, there is one important quality that Matt and I do not share, which is the fact that Matt is successful and popular specifically because of the qualities that we share. I really don't have control over that. Because my envy was more benign than not, it didn't lead me to outright attacking Matt. But if you had read the previous draft of this script, you might not necessarily agree. There is a very obvious undercurrent of snobbery that is just all permeated throughout that first script. It's really bad.
Hey everybody, it's JoJo from the future doing editing. I realized that I talk a lot about how bad this draft is, and I didn't actually, when I did the initial recording, put anything of it in. So I'm just going to read part of it. This is after Matt tells a story about how he got upset with his new DM who had a troll that could swing a tree trunk without having a rank in fighter. Matt realized later that the design of the game required you to think of the rules in such a way that meant you would become someone who cared very deeply for the rules, which would mean that you would be someone who wouldn't be willing to go against the rules, which is A paradox, Matt. You said some things that are the opposite of each other. Matt and his friends' reactions to the DM was less about the rules and more about Matt and his friends. The problem was how the group reacted to the DM running the game. The rules weren't anything at this point. That makes me uncomfortable to say. Let me find another good example. This is after he says he moves to having a more rules as language approach, where he goes, Matt goes on later to say he chilled out and had more fun, which is great. I'm happy for him. But Matty, Dr. Colville, I hate to say this, but you did not get better. You just became different. You made a lateral move. Not up, not down, just lateral. And then this is the worst part for me. This is when I really realized it. This is he then brings up some examples of really skillful people in various art forms. And he says, I think it was Oscar Wilde who would provide a script that basically was like, I think you can fix all of the these and those. Anyone can find good examples of people to support an argument. I mean, Picasso was really good figure drawer of academic realism. He later drew like squares and whatnot, but first he was real good at physical human bodies. So he didn't realize that drawing squares was better. It was just better for him. Would we hate Picasso if he never came into his blue period and onwards? I don't know. And I don't think it's a good argument to have anyway. If anything, that Picasso was impressive to us says more about us than it does him. This is just 3 of like dozens of things I said. So pretty bad. It's a fruit fly.
I was being an asshole is what I'm trying to say. I was being a real asshole. And the reason why is because I was experiencing malicious envy and I wanted to cause harm. Both the form and the consequences of your envy depend a lot on your situation. So in my case, from the start, I had a lot of things in common with Matt already, which allowed my envy to be more benign from the outset. And the thing that stopped even the level of maliciousness my envy originally had was the fact that I watched a video from Contrapoints on envy that allowed me to better conceptualize what I was feeling, and that helped me move away from being so malicious. That said, the video that I watched from Contrapoints, it didn't completely explain what I was experiencing, which led me to do more research, which is what brought us here. Granted, it was far less research than I did for the video about Matt, but that's because I feel like I was ultimately a little bit more healthier at that point. And before you start typing in the comments, let me just say, I recognize the irony in what I just said. You were really envious of Matt Colville, but that's okay because you're really envious of Contrapoints. Yes.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Because, well, I'm starting to think that envy might not be entirely bad. Now, the historical depictions of envy have been ones of, it is a sin. It is a defect of the spirit. It is a weakness of the will.
Philosopher Max Scheler called it a self-poisoning of the mind. There's a Christian saying that envy is the only sin that gives no pleasure. Because the other sins are fun, right?
True, malicious envy certainly presents in that way. But envy is an emotion. It is an emotional state that you feel, which affects your behavior. Now, the thing about emotions is that there is a biological benefit to having them. It might not seem like it, but that's why you have them at all.
Evolution is thrifty and tinkering. It has had available in the brains of numerous species those mechanisms that have proven successful in a variety of ecological niches. It would have made economical sense if the brain structures required to support new strategies would retain a functional link to their forerunners. Their purpose is the same, survival, and the parameters of their success are also the same, well-being and the absence of pain.
You as an individual are more likely to survive in the world because you have emotions. Now, I would say they are the result of evolution for my next point, but I understand that there's a lot of debate over whether or not evolution exists. So I want you to just imagine you're like a tiger. You're a big, strong tiger. The emotion of envy would have an obvious survival benefit if you were a big, strong tiger. You big, strong tiger, you. Like if you see another tiger who's doing really well for itself and has an advantage, well, if you're envious of that tiger and you can sort of recognize how that tiger did what it did, well, that's something you can control, and it seems like it's doing pretty well. It would make sense for you to have a subconscious way to compel yourself to behave like this other more successful tiger, because it'll help you get more food, it will help you avoid other predators, and ultimately you'll be able to have more baby tiger cubs for Joe Exotic.
Now I understand. I saw tiger.
Now, in situations where you would see another tiger who has an advantage that you don't have, if you don't really know how they got that, then getting that advantage yourself isn't something you can control. It's ambiguous. So, in that case, your envy would still compel you to act, but instead of emulation, it would be retribution or destruction. Instead of trying to be like the other tiger, you're trying to harm the other tiger. If that tiger has a big advantage that you don't know how to get, well, that tiger is going to be able to make more tiger cubs, like for Joe and for Carol. Can't be having that. By destroying their advantage, you make sure that you stay relevant within the gene pool. And this is the way that envy manifests in humans. I'm done talking about tigers, forget about that. Envy manifests in humans in the exact same way. It helps humans make better decisions in order to gain advantages, or, at the very least, ensure they are not disadvantaged by the people that they envy. The most challenging thing I felt about this entire experience is the fact that I didn't understand that what I was experiencing was envy, and more importantly, me not knowing that I was experiencing envy is what was sort of making my envy so malicious. Like, I felt envy towards Matt Colville. I felt it as envy, but because I didn't know how envy was supposed to feel, I was able to kind of turn it into something else, something ugly. This isn't to say that anytime anyone is upset or attacked, it's because they're misunderstanding their own envy. Not at all. What I'm trying to say is that in my particular instance, my cognitive and logical brain brought me to what seemed like the perfectly reasonable conclusions that the reason I felt the way I did towards language, not rules, is because Matt was being ignorant.
So envy is shameful, guilty, and socially unacceptable, and we deal with that by suppressing it from our awareness. We could call this envy to contempt sublimation. Sublimation is a psychoanalytic term, which means that you transform an ego-wounding feeling or socially unacceptable longing into something more ego-flattering or socially acceptable.
I had logically concluded the fact that Matt was being lazy because he did not do as much research as I did. And probably worst of all, I had concluded that he would be grateful that I finished his idea for him. My envy didn't do that. My logic did. My envy was just kind of trying to help me. And if I didn't realize it was envy that I was feeling, that's what you would have been watching right now, if you'd have been watching this at all. I'm very ashamed that I wanted to make that, because me wanting to have made that video means that I am a very petty person. The goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to be better. And the danger of logic, I think, is it makes you understand something perfectly. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. And I think also what's important to state is that while I'm ashamed of what I was going to do, I am absolutely unashamed of the fact that envy is what led me to do it. Particularly because, well, I mean, envy got me into this mess, and ultimately it was envy that got me out of it and helped me to make a much, much better choice. That's pretty much my whole thing, I guess. I think at this point, the only thing that's left is to make some closing remarks, I guess. That seems like a good thing to make in a video essay. Now, one thing that also came up while I was making this video was I kind of had this realization that there's a lot of, well, stuff that you can look at for motivation out there. A lot of people, seemingly very successful people, not just like random motivational speakers, but celebrities who give motivational speeches. And what's interesting about a lot of those speeches, at least that I found, is that for the most part, they don't really tell you specific things you need to do in order to be successful. And that's really kind of the subtext of why you're watching it. You're watching the successful person to figure out how to do that. Their success is sort of an advantage that they have that you want. Now, what's interesting about a lot of those sort of motivational videos or motivational speakers is they don't really tell you the specific things you need to do in order to be successful. Or if they do give you some kind of action to take, it's very general and there's a million examples of what it could literally be. It's normally something like show grit, persevere, you can work through this.
But when it comes to business and when it comes to executing, it's up against this. And I got to go that way. And I don't give a fuck who is in front of me. They're not going to stop me. I'll execute this thing and it'll come out this summer. You guys will execute this thing during the summer, right, when it's time to really put in a lot more work. Getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning every day before anybody else and grounding my thought process is in the no one will outwork me.
I mean, yes, those are generally things you can do, but the specific way that manifests is not made clear. But what's also very interesting about those sorts of videos is that a lot of the stories that they'll tell and a lot of the things they'll bring up in those motivational speeches are how difficult things were for them. I had to sleep under a desk. I had to sleep in my car. I got kicked out of my house.
And I thought, well, fuck. I leave home like you guys left home. I'm ready to tackle the world, get after it, achieve my dreams and goals. Fucking crushed by 22, 23 years old. Now I got to move back in with my mom and dad. I played on great teams, though. Wait a second, this is not supposed to be my future.
That information doesn't actually make them have better advice. In fact, it doesn't change their advice at all. But what it does do is it makes their success seem more deserved.